Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast, a podcast that looks at really important business topics and topics about life, but in a light-hearted way. Today we're talking to Lisa Gerber about the power of story. This is a really, really fun conversation. We had a lot of laughs, and we learned how important storytelling is. And if you are just watching the video, yes, I am recording this out in my shed. It's nice weather, even though I'm wearing a jacket. It's really nice and sunny, so I'm going to go jump back out in the sun right now. But until then, everybody, have a magical week. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. This week, as you can see from the title, we have a guest, and we'll get to them very shortly. But first, let's jump into the regular team, see what's going on. So, Danette, different background today. Where are you? What's happening this week?
Oh, it's been a big week, Jez. So I started the week in Wagga doing an unconscious bias training, which was awesome. Home for a couple of days, and now I'm in Canberra. And the reason I'm in Canberra, one, was to get my hair done yesterday, very important. But also, Graham is an apology because Graham's actually in hospital at the moment. Looks like he's got gallstones. So been juggling that as well this week. So he sends his love to all of our audience, but obviously he's not going to be on today. So, but other than that, all good. And the exciting thing at the farm, I thought I had one baby hare, but it turns out we've got two. And they look like little Easter bunnies. So I took a video yesterday. We'll send it through, and Jez, you can share that on our social media.
Very cute. Yeah, and we all send our love to Graham as well, hoping for a swift recovery there. Hopefully see him next week on the podcast. But yes, fingers crossed for him, and glad he's on the mend. Leggers, how are you going this week? What's up?
Yeah, I'm good. It's been a pretty quiet week for me this week. I've not done nearly as much travel as Danette, but just had a movie night last night. Nothing too special. But yeah,
what movie did we go for, Leggers?
Ooh, it was, I can't remember the name, but it had Kevin Bacon in it, and he got hypnotized and could see a murder of a girl, and then he goes ham. He goes crazy and destroys his house and stuff. It was not his best acting performance, but the group that we always watch terrible horror movies. So that was another one to add to the list. Can't remember, Echo or something. I'll have to look that up and get back to you about what it was called. Yeah,
Kevin Bacon wasn't good at faking his emotions there, it sounds like.
He was giving Nicolas Cage with his performance, 110%, and it gave a lot of us the ick. But yeah, was fun.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, great stuff there, Leggers. Glad to have you on today. And Lisa Gerber, our guest, how was your week this week?
Hi, everyone. It's been a great week. I'm actually recovering or transitioning back into reality after vacation last week. So it's just been catching up. And but it's been a lovely week. And I did want to give an animal update because I was expecting the guinea fowl and the reptile update. And around here, we have bear and moose in my neighborhood, and it's springtime, so the bear are getting ready to wake up from their winter's hibernation, but not quite yet. I haven't seen the first one, but it should be any day. So that's the animal update, just to stay on brand with y'all.
Very good, Lisa. Well, Lisa, there's so many questions out of that before we even dive into anything. Just off the top of my head, I've just got two questions. First of all, you're talking about bears. Where are you based out of? And second question is, what was the holiday? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so I'm based in Sandpoint, Idaho, which is in the northwest quadrant of the U.S., Seattle, Washington being our nearest metro area, about 5 hours away. And I was on a ski touring trip in the backcountry of British Columbia, Canada. So they drop you off at a hut via helicopter on a Sunday, and they pick you up 7 days later. But we're there with 2 ski guides and a chef, and there's a group of 10 of us, and we just climbed up mountains, skied down all day long, and we got fed and had a sauna. It was amazing. Offline, it was really good.
Wow, that sounds like a great trip. Great to have you on, Lisa. You've just had a whole trip. The bears haven't yet come out, so there's a level of calm in the air at this current state, which is exciting.
Very much so.
So Lisa, so people have heard about you now, where you live, some recent holidays, but I guess if people are being introduced to you for the first time, would you like to tell our audience just a little bit about yourself as well?
Well, sure. So I am a strategic storyteller. I help leaders communicate to connect through effective storytelling. And just a little bit about how I got into this. I mean, my career started in travel and hospitality, which is sort of a important sounding way of saying that when I graduated from college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I moved to Aspen, Colorado, and I skied during the day and waited on the rich and famous at a very nice hotel in Aspen at night. So I did that for a few years until I decided to actually put my communications degree to work. I moved to Seattle and got a job at a company in downtown Seattle. Well, lo and behold, one morning I went into work only to discover that they had purchased a ski resort in Idaho. And their director of marketing, shortly after that, resigned like a year later, and they moved me out here. That's how I ended up here in Sandpoint, Idaho. So things kind of came full circle, and I actually got to ski, but had an actual job. So that was kind of cool. Anyway, so fast forward now, 20 years later, I started my own practice when I left the ski resort after a few years. And that I pulled the storytelling. The storytelling piece was my favorite part of all of that. And it's what I've done in the 20 years with my practice has evolved to what I do today.
Wow. Well, I mean, first of all, obviously, great story. But, you know,
hope so.
and well told.
I mean, the pressure was on for that to be a good story, right?
Absolutely. And look, it delivered. So that's great.
Thank you.
And I think it's a great skill and something I think a lot of people want to work on. So I think it's exciting that our topic today is the power of story. Now, we have a bunch of questions for you, but before we get into that, I mean, you've touched on it a little bit, but do you want to tell us a little bit about why you chose the topic power of story today?
Yes. It is my favorite thing to talk about. I mean, who doesn't love a good story, right? And yeah, it's what I do all day, every day, and it's how humans communicate regularly. And it's so interesting to me that on a day-to-day basis, we share stories back and forth in our personal lives, and yet when we step into our professional lives, that's something that falls to the wayside. And we fail to take the time to connect. We don't listen to each other. We work alongside people. We don't know anything about them. People, leaders, entrepreneurs, they feel like they're doing such good work, but they don't understand why they don't have a following, why people aren't on board with their ideas. And so it's the center of everything that I do aside from skiing. And I just love talking about it. So I'm excited. That was why I picked my topic.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's definitely something we've got a bunch of questions, so I think it might just make sense to dive right in. Danette, you've always got great opening questions, so do you want to lead us off and tell us a bit about why you chose them as well?
Yes, and I remembered before we even get to these that I have a story about Marg for this week, because Marg is one of our team. She is a mum of two little girls, so she works part-time. She's our customer-loving person, Lisa. This week, not only did Graham end up in hospital, but Marg also ended up in hospital because she was climbing a ladder that collapsed, and she thought, her husband thought she'd actually broken some toes, but she actually just dislocated it. So also like to send our love and hugs to Marg this week as well. So everyone, please be safe for the next little while.
Yes.
And now I'll come to my questions, Lisa. So I always have two because I love questions. So my first one, and why I chose these, like, I love stories. I love your work. So So I thought we'd start with a really simple one for people who haven't really thought about stories before. Why are they important?
Yes. So think about when you sit down in a movie theater and the lights go down and the movie's about to start, or like your favorite Netflix episode, or you sit down with a book. What is that like? That how does that feel when you're just about to sink into a story? It's such a great feeling, right? And likewise, if you're in a meeting or in a keynote presentation and the speaker starts off with a story. I mean, this was something I did. One of my very first keynote presentations, I started with a story about my dog that was very relevant to my topic. It was an 8:30 a.m. session. And afterwards, someone came up to me and said, I really, really wasn't into this conference or this day at all. But when you started out with that story of your beautiful dog, like you brought me in immediately. And so stories just have this beautiful ability to shift our energy. And in the professional setting, they help us create understanding around a topic. They really solidify that in our minds. They help shift misunderstandings. And they galvanize people around an idea. I love to look at some of our iconic change makers of today. You think of like someone like Jane Goodall is one of my favorites, who's dedicated her life to environmentalism and activism. And in a Time magazine article interview, she said, if you can get to the heart with story, you may not know it at the time, but people will go on thinking. And I love that quote as a setting the context for all of the work that I do. I open my book with it, and it says everything to me.
That's a great answer, and I love that quote from Jane Goodall. It's gorgeous. So my follow-up question is: now we've sort of got people going, "Oh, this is something maybe I need to learn about." What are some simple things that people or organisations can do to improve their storytelling?
Yeah. First and foremost, I make it sound simple, but it's not that easy. We have to get out of our heads and into their heads. We think about storytelling as they're stories about ourselves or stories about the work that we're doing, but at the end of the day, these stories are in service to the people who we're trying to reach. And if we want to get them on board with our idea, we need to know what they care about, what's on their mind, what might be their potential objections, what do they value, so that we can frame the story within their set of values. So first and foremost is understanding what their needs are. I like to say, what does this conversation need of me right now? So that we know where they stand and can tell the right story. So I'm less interested in how beautiful a story or how epic a story you're sharing, and more interested in what is the story that you're sharing. The pitfall we fall into so often is we talk about the thing that we're so excited about. The most simple example is our new website, or, our new branding and our 20th anniversary. And that's just not what people care about. I'd offer one other supposedly simple thing to improve your storytelling, and that's to practice. So often people think they say, well, we're not very good at storytelling, but they're not working at it. They're not practicing. They're not editing their stories like you would edit an email. And you need to get that feedback and keep it short. And now I'm thinking how I feel like I'm rambling right now. I'm not rambling, but we practice our stories and keep them concise. And the shorter the story, the better, the more interesting. No one really wants to listen to a 5-minute story unless you're watching a Netflix episode, and then we want to watch it for an hour.
I love both of those suggestions. And I love that you were editing yourself as you were doing this, because this is what we do.
It's so painful.
I teach a lot of communications, and I say to people, hands up if you've spent time developing yourself, practicing, etc. And people look at me like, no, I communicate every day, therefore I must get better. It's like, no, 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 you actually have to do exactly as you said, practice, get that feedback and stuff like that. So I love, they're two really great tips that I
Yeah,
hope audience members actually take on board and go and practice because they will get better. So thank you, Lisa. That was awesome.
absolutely. You're so welcome. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of me telling stories, to be honest. I'll tell about 15 stories that don't really end up ending any story. It's just like I'll start saying something and I'll be like, oh, you know, it was really interesting the other day. I was going to this basketball game, but hold on, first I got to tell you about this basketball team. The reason why it's important to me is, and then it's like all of a sudden we've gone down so many tangents. I don't even know where we started.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. And that's where the practice comes in. So you can sort of organize your thoughts and, people have different ways, whether they need to write it down, type it out, record it, listen back, just get some feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's jump into John's question because I think it's a good follow-up kind of, and it sort of gives us a different framing, which is, I've gone again. Hold on, I think I'm back.
You're back.
We'll jump into John's question there, which is we all have history, which is our story. How easy or hard is it to interpret our story to use it to empower ourselves?
That is a perfect segue to actually what you were just sharing, Jez, because I love the idea of editing our own stories. Because so much has happened. If you were just to ask me, what is my story? If I were to ask you, what is your story? There's 18 million different ways you could share your story. So I like to, a history is not a story. Just because it happened doesn't mean it has to be in the story. So I love the idea of looking back at something that happened and deciding taking agency in your own story. How do I want this to shape me? And how can I share it in a way that others are also going to benefit? So this might mean that I'm looking for a moment of transformation or a lesson that was learned, something sort of pivotal, and then building the story around that moment. So there's a theme there and a lesson. And so to get back to, so how does that empower ourselves in that, I do some work with a refugee organization, and there's studies that show that when people who have been displaced have the opportunity to tell their story, it's very healing and therapeutic. You may have heard that before. But it's that idea of taking agency over how you choose to react to circumstances that happen to you. We can be a victim, we can be angry, we can carry that around with us, or we can decide like, no, this is how I came out better for this. So I think it's not easy, but it's a good idea to reinterpret our stories.
That's a great idea. I think, a key word that I'm hearing a little bit is edit. Editing sounds like a crucial element here.
I love that.
So that's good to know. That's going to stick in my mind. Leggers, your question in the chat. What was your question?
I haven't put it up, I'm sorry. But I hope that's okay, Lisa. But
yes.
My question is, when storytelling, what are some of the things that make the story more effective to the listener? So like metaphors or like what sort of things make the story sort of like really sink in for the listener? Mm-hmm. Sorry, I didn't give you time to think about
it. I love it. And I love metaphor. I love that you said metaphor, because often we can use story as a metaphor for a concept. So if you have a lot of statistics, for example, that you want to communicate, it's important to share that information, the facts and the data, but then you can use a story to bring those statistics alive. So take one number, one out of that large number. our brains just become numb to numbers. But if you bring it alive with an actual story, that's really powerful. And it goes to exactly what you were asking, is how does it kind of cement this idea in our brain? One of the most straightforward, I really wish I could find a better example to illustrate this, but is the young boy that was tragically washed up on the beach during the Syrian refugee crisis, and how that changed the conversation around the Syrian humanitarian crisis overnight, when meanwhile organizations had been putting out facts and data for 4 and 5 years, but this one picture just changed it. The question is, what kinds of things in stories to help cement them in our minds?
Yeah. Just make it a good story, or more effective, as a tool, I guess.
So there's this other sort of contrasting advice that I have, which is that there's brevity, but then there's also specificity in our storytelling. So, as I said earlier, having a short story is really important when we don't have a lot of time to capture people's attention. So keeping it as brief and making sure that every word, every piece of the story is really serving its purpose. It's serving the point of your story. And that keeps it brief, that keeps it clear. But on the other hand, sometimes we want to take a detail and pop it out and bring it to life. I like to think of the wood grain on a wood. You wouldn't want to paint it over. You'd be so generic that you paint it over. But we want to see that tone and the grain in the wood. So if you have someone, I worked with a woman who was telling her story about escaping a situation of domestic abuse, and she shared all her, all the events as they occurred in chronological order. And then when we went over and over and over it again, I discovered that, she came to this tipping point at a gas station in a parking lot where she only had $7 left. And in the parking lot, she made phone calls to find a shelter, a place to stay. And she made 76 phone calls until she found a place. So little details like that they say so much with so little. So I would say that those are two really big ways to be really compelling with your storytelling.
Thanks, Lisa. That was great. Great answer.
Good.
And I think also outside of that last example, which was a great example of the use of numbers, I think just putting the words num and numbers together in a general sense is a kind of a good point. That does ring true, yes. I think.
Well, that's one of my A statements. Danette knows that.
I was going to say, last week, Lisa, our guest was Robert Behar, and he was talking about budgets and numbers, so we won't tell Robert that.
No, we won't tell Robert that. He's such a great guy.
Yeah. No, we love Robert. Let's jump into my question, though. Well, speaking of powerful, positive and negative ways that we can influence stories, my question was, how powerful can stories be in negative and positive ways? I mean, you kind of pointed out in some ways, we talk about that image of that young Syrian boy, that story in a way tells us 1,000 words. But I guess right. I wanted for you to kind of break down for us, how can stories be powerful in a positive and negative way?
So stories shape our worldview from a very young age, whether we realize it or not. And I think of creation stories, from indigenous cultures versus Western religions, for example. If you look at the story of Adam and Eve and the forbidden fruit and being banished and punished, and how that sort of spawned a culture of scarcity and supply and demand. And then you have indigenous culture creation stories of more, centered around abundance and reciprocity and taking only what you need, and sort of that dichotomy there. And how, without realizing it, that shapes who we are as individuals based on what stories we were told as we are raised and how they are embedded. So I'm getting to current day where we don't even realize how we are so embedded in our own perspectives. And it was George, I don't know how to say his last name, Lakoff or Lakoff. He wrote a book, Metaphors We Live By. He's a cognitive linguist who studies the power of language. And he said that we see and hear stories through our own frames and our own perspectives. So when you give us facts and data, we filter that through those frames, through what we know. And we choose to accept or reject it based on those perspectives. And so I find that really interesting because that explains a lot of what's happening now, like in the American political landscape with, say, I guess we still call him President Trump, and why people still support someone like that, even given the facts and the data. And so I see that, and maybe we're going into dangerous territory by getting too political here. So give me if you want me to stop, but I see that as a dangerous power of story. Very much so. Whereas the positive, we see how stories can bring people together, how they bridge divides. And one of my favorite examples of this is Katharine Hayhoe is the chief climate scientist for the Nature Conservancy, and she wrote a book called Saving Us. And it's the whole premise of the book is how we can bridge the divide on the climate change conversation by connecting with people through story. And it's quite powerful. If someone is a staunch climate change denier, but say they're a hunter or they're a fisher person, then if you came to them and talked to them about about where they go fishing, and if they still want that to be there, if they still want fish to be in their lakes, then you can talk to them about climate change, and then they start to see things. And so it's connecting through the story in a very positive way.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And, it's just one of these things that I feel like we constantly forget how exciting and interesting even communication through talking is. And stories obviously can hold such a deep resonance. You're talking about how it can be embedded as a... Oh, sorry. My internet has been dropping out a little bit today. So sorry to the listeners there. But I was just going to say, it's amazing things that we can do with communication. I always think of how amazing talking is and must seem from the perspective of a dog. Because if I stood in front of a group of people and said, hey, can everyone form a circle? A dog would be shocked by the fact that instantly all these people move into a perfect formation and no one's done anything. It's like a psychic power that I've told everybody to do this. And then you talk about how it can be embedded so much deeper and more broadly. It's kind of an interesting, weird power and skill at a broad level. I guess one question that I did want to talk about, because you were talking about embedding stories earlier on, I want to jump into Marg's question here, which is like, how can we help our kids build their stories to become their best selves?
Mm-hmm. This is a difficult question for me. I'm not a parent, but I was a kid, so I can tell it from that perspective. I'm going to sidestep the question a little bit and then I'll get back to it. But stories... So we sort of talked about this already. Stories are told, stories are heard, but also stories are inferred through the actions and the experiences. So getting to this idea of stories being embedded in our mind, we're also, as children, these we create our own stories based on what's happening around us in our world. And I just want to sort of just have people be thinking, like in a professional setting as well. I've written about this lately, just about the experience that you as a business or a brand create for your customers and your clients, and what kind of stories they're inferring from that experience. If you're nickeling and diming your clients and they feel like that they then create a story about you from that, and then they talk to others about it in the same way. So likewise, as a parent, I would be thinking about not only the stories I'm telling, but what are the stories that they're inferring, the stories that they're creating by how I'm role modeling, by how I'm speaking to my spouse, how I treat others, and how I empower my child to know that anything is possible, how I'm encouraging them, how I'm supporting them. I think that's going to be a more powerful channel than just the stories that we're telling them.
Yeah, nice. That's a great one. Thanks for that, Lisa. Let's jump into Kanika's question. So this is, I guess, there's some similarities here, but the question is, what is a story that a lot of people tell themselves that isn't true? And this, I guess you can kind of take this in any way, but I guess it's a more societal question. Are there questions in society or, stories in society that we just say about ourselves in general that maybe don't stack up when we actually look at it?
I love how these questions have driven a more philosophical conversation around storytelling than just like the corporate storytelling. It's really cool. I don't know exactly what the story is that people are telling themselves that isn't true, but what I can say is that it is the story that doesn't serve them. So what are the stories that we're telling ourselves that don't serve us? I think about this all the time because I struggle with all kinds of internal dialogue, I guess internal argument issues. Like how do we speak to ourselves internally? Do you pay attention to that? And sometimes I get so exhausted by myself. And I have started to say, you know what? This is not useful at all. Like when I got nervous in the lead up to this podcast, to having this recording with you, so nervous. Why am I nervous? Like I'm talking about the things that I do. I'm talking about myself. There's no reason for that. And so I just continually remind myself, this is not a helpful story that I'm telling myself. And
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say.
Can I just add one? I just want to add one more thing to that. I think on that note, I try to be my own best friend. And I have found that to be really liberating. And it has prompted me to be more aware and attentive to how I speak to myself and how I encourage and support myself and need it less from others externally and get it more intrinsically.
Amazing. Well, I just wanted to say 2 points. First of all, we try and keep our guests extremely on edge before we get into recording. We want them feeling nervous. And then, secondly, I was going to say, actually, Lisa, I might follow up on that question. That talking about becoming your best friend. Yeah. Do you want to maybe tell us the story behind that and how that has changed your story? Because that seems very interesting to me.
Well, I will tell you that story. So I play the clarinet. I started playing the clarinet when I was in 5th grade through sophomore year in college. And a few years ago, I picked it back up. And I heard about an open mic party that was happening last summer at a friend's house. And, well, not really a friend, someone I knew. And I was like, I'm going to go and I am going to play this Mozart piece. And I had like the symphonic accompaniment to it and everything that I just had to plug into the speaker. And I arrived, and the music, the genre of music was not at all classical music. It was, you know, they were playing folk and rock, and there were younger kids. And the minute I arrived, I said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to play. And I sat there in the audience and I looked around at these people sitting out on the lawn having a wonderful time. No one was judging the music. And I said to myself, that's when I started to just do this. Like, I encouraged myself, and I reframed the story that I was telling myself. Like, they are going to love this because it's going to be so different and unexpected. And no one is sitting here thinking, I don't want to listen to this person. They're going, you know, they have only a generous attitude about it. So that's really sort of the impetus. When you asked me about that, I actually wondered if you actually knew about this event, and I wasn't really prepared to share it with you in a very short and concise way. But on the drive home, I just felt really proud of myself. I went to this party by myself. I hardly knew anybody. And I got up there and I played that Mozart piece. And even during it, I thought, oh, I'm playing too long. I should stop. And I just said, you know what? You're doing great. And it doesn't matter if you're squeaking, and it doesn't matter if you're less than perfect. You're doing great, and just keep going. And I just that was one of those moments that I like to carry with me as pushing beyond my boundaries and having a good time doing it.
100%. That's so exciting. And I have certainly been to a few open mic nights, and I can say a clarinet piece would be much appreciated. Because it is a lot of, sometimes it's the same thing over and over again. It's nice to kind of mix it up.
Thank you. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, we've still got other questions, but I think we'll, for this session, we're going to have you back on because we'll get into them next time. But let's jump into some final thoughts from people. So I might start with Danette. Danette, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation and the power of story?
It's been a brilliant conversation, and definitely have to get you back. I really like that piece. If people are looking to improve their storytelling, get out of their head and focus on others' needs and make it sort of relevant to them, and moving from giving them lots of numbers to picking a bit where it's like, let's hone in and let's create the picture around this particular number or the story around this particular number. I took away, like you probably would have seen the pen going, I've got 3 pages of notes of ideas I want to go back and start practicing. So thank you, Lisa. It's been awesome.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Danette, and great questions today. Great stuff. Legos, any final thoughts on today's conversation and the power of story?
Well, obviously this was a great conversation. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming in. I was just like, something that really stuck with me was like sort of the example you used with like the climate change deniers and like telling the story that shows how it affects them personally. Because I think a lot of people that sort of don't believe in that sort of stuff are like, it's not affecting me, it's not my issue, but in reality it is, and it's the small things that you have to sort of figure out about them to be like, this is why you should care, because of this, like the story of the future basically. But I think that that's really powerful, because like usually when you're telling a story, it is from your sort of perspective, but I think it's very interesting and something that I'll have to apply to my future stories, but like taking into consideration who the audience is, not just what I want to say to them.
Exactly.
But yeah, great conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And thanks, Legos. Thanks for jumping on. Always good to have you on. I wanted to say definitely a big takeaway for me was editing and the sort of the power of that in many different ways. Sort of in what Legos is talking about, editing for the audience, editing to make the story make more sense, to take out unnecessary noise, and just to make it as interesting as possible. So that's a good one. And as you mentioned, your is numbers. Those two things being together that you brought up, that's a good takeaway for me as well, I think. Lisa, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation and the power of story?
Well, it's interesting teaching storytelling because it's something that we all do intuitively. And a lot of the times, in my workshops and when I'm speaking to organizations, what we're doing is pulling out things that people have already been doing, that they've been doing without thinking, and really bringing it up to the forefront and thinking about it. So it's why I'm so passionate about this. I really love talking about it. And yeah, those are my final thoughts. I really appreciate being asked to come on and talk about it. Storytelling, it's just so much fun.
No, it's been amazing for us. I think we've all taken away a lot. Now, Lisa, I'm sure not only have we taken a lot away, but I'm sure also our listeners have. So, Lisa, someone's been listening to this. They're like, you know what? We need someone in here who can help us get our story out there. I want to become a better storyteller. What's the best ways for people to interact with you? And if you've got any books as well, feel free to let us know about them as well.
Sure. So my website is lisabgerber.com, B as in Beth. And you can find my contact info, me, everything, my book. I have written a book called From So What to So Funded, and that's really for the nonprofit market. And my book, The Power of Story, is coming out hopefully in the spring. I'm finalizing the draft right now. So that's exciting. I do have a newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks, and if people want to sign up for that, they can get a digital version of my book, From So What to So Funded, for free. So happy to share that with people. I actually do have a link for your listeners, so I can share that with you afterwards if you want to put it in the show notes. And I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, Lisa Gerber. You can find me quite easily there. I would love to continue the conversation with anybody. I work all over the world, so love to hear from your listeners.
Fantastic. Well, all those links are going to be in the description, so you can go check those out right now. I want to thank you, Lisa, for being on, being a great guest. This has been a really fun conversation. Awesome. Leggers and Danette, thank you so much for your insights and questions. It's been awesome. To all our listeners that have been sharing everything, thank you so much. It's been great. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.